Welcome to our series, Retrieving Romans. This is presentation number 14 in our series, and the title for today's topic is Retrieving Compassion. And this connects very nicely with what we have been covering in Romans chapters 9 through 11. And we are now transitioning into chapter 12, because time and again in those previous chapters, Paul will talk about mercy. He has mercy on his mind, as it were, and he says here in chapter 11, just as you were once disobedient to God, but have now received mercy because of their disobedience. So they have now been disobedient in order that by the mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. He's talking about Jews and Gentiles that are equally recipients of mercy, and a strange dynamic that God has put in place to make this a reality. For God has locked up all in disobedience, so that he may be merciful to all. It is as though human disobedience is sort of factored out. It is all mercy, that God is not sad about displaying his mercy to human need, and even to human sin, even to human disobedience. So we are living by mercy. And what follows? What follows is to living out mercy, to living it out, to practicing it, to making God's mercy show in human community, as it were. And sure enough, this is where it picks up in chapter 12. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And notice here the renewing of the mind is kind of general. It's like it goes in all directions, that everything will look different when we think about it this way, or when we subject ourselves to mind renewal, as it were. Now, there is a statement to back this up from Robert Jewett's commentary on Romans, where he says that the use of therefore, that I urge you therefore, that is connected to the passage here in Romans 11. So why does he say therefore? Well, here is the therefore. And let's read it. The use of therefore in connection with oiktermo to theo, mercies of God, indicates that the earlier argument of Romans provides the basis and force of the ethical appeal. Well, that's clearly the case then. So we are on solid ground when we say that we are now exploring the meaning of mercy put to practice. That is what we are aiming at. It is as though God has put a temple of mercy in the world, and that he is inviting humans, inviting all creation into this temple of mercy. And now that is somewhat of a risky metaphor, of course, to call it a temple, because a temple is a building out there, separated from the world. How does the temple relate to the world? And I have an illustration, or at least I will try to attempt an illustration here. This is in the city of Cordoba, in the south of Spain, in a region called Andalusia, that used to be under Muslim rule for hundreds of years. And the Muslim conquerors of Spain, in the late 8th century, they started building this mosque here in Cordoba. It's called the Mezquita now. And in my view, it is one of the most successful, one of the most evocative houses of worship I have ever seen. The second one on my list is actually also a mosque. So I have as a headline here, decompartmentalizing the sacred and the secular, because the architects who built the Mezquita, they thought, well, we are going to build a house of worship, but we are also going to take away the boundaries between the sacred space and the secular space. We are going to make the distinction between sacred and secular as small as possible. So they built, or they planted, alleyways of palm trees leading into the mosque. And then inside the mosque, they made it look like there are palm trees inside too, to make the transition from outside to inside seem almost unnoticeable, to make sure that the sacred is also secular and the secular is sacred, as it were, that God's mercy is felt not just in some small building here and there, but that it is felt in the world. And this is a big step to think that, and it doesn't hurt to use an Islamic expression for what we are talking about. In the name of God, the merciful and the compassionate. That is the God. Paul will talk about whatever meanings there may be in these different religious traditions. So we are going to do an imaginative journey here. We're going to imagine how mercy plays out ecologically. I'll explain why I'm choosing that. But let's read again the way he talks about it in Romans 12. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Something is missing in the way the world relates to things. And one of the things that is missing is mercy. And here God will reintroduce mercy, as it were, to the way we live our lives, renewing your minds that you may discern what is the will of God and what may it be ecologically in relation to other creatures and the earth, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And the lack of specifics here is fine, because we can say that this applies to everything. Here there is a mind under renewal. Now, why do this ecologically? Why think about it in ecological terms? Well, here I have Jacques Derrida, who is a French philosopher. He died in 2004, who is famous for other things, but he's also quite famous for something he says about the relationship between humans and animals. He calls it a war on mercy, a war against compassion. War is waged over the matter of compassion. This war is probably ageless, but it is passing through a critical phase in our time. We are passing through that phase, and it passes through us. To think that the war we find ourselves waging is not only a duty, a responsibility, an obligation, it is also a necessity, a constraint that, like it or not, directly or indirectly, no one can escape. So if we take this seriously, if we look at what Derrida says and takes it seriously, it means that this is a war as a necessity, means that you are either on the wrong side of the war, that we are the ones who are actually engaged in practices that belong to a war against compassion, or that we change sides if that were the case, and we become warriors on behalf of mercy, warriors on behalf of compassion, as it were. And I have two illustrations to make this point on the war clear. Here we have a target. You can see the target here, and you can see the name of the arrow, that there is a war on mercy, and the arrow then is the sort of war symbol. Or you can say it this way, that that mercy is the target in this war. And then we can ask, in what sense has mercy become a target in our time? And yes, Derrida has already answered it by saying that there is a war on mercy in relation to non-human creatures. So I will feature three things that are very big in the Bible and that are very big in contemporary ecology. I will feature seeds and soil or land, and then we will also look, as we have already, on animals, our practices in relation to non-human creatures or animals. So let's do the seeds first, just to introduce it. That we have in our time, of course, seeds are basic to our lives, and we could not live without them. But seeds become a patented commodity. And in that sense, in that paradigm, seeds have in some ways moved outside its native context of mercy to become something else, to become, as it were, less merciful. And one of the expressions of that is genetically modified seeds that we call Roundup Ready seeds. So we'll say something about that. And then there is soil, and I will also talk about land or land use, but soil in particular. And I am indebted to this book by David Montgomery, who is a professor on that subject, and his book is called Dirt, The Erosion of Civilizations. We'll have a comment on that. And then just to highlight that a little, you can see the title here, how dirt in some ways corresponds, or soil corresponds to the rise and fall of civilizations. And then our last thing then exhibit will be in relation to animals. Let's do the seeds. Then God said, in the first chapter of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, just a few days into the story of creation here, then God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. We're not far into the story, before there is vegetation. And there is this phenomenon of seed, or seeds, that will be mentioned a total of 10 times in the first chapter of the Bible. Either directly with the word seed or with the pronoun corresponding to it. And you can do what you want to do, but I think that there is a kind of excitement in God's voice when he talks about seed, that this is a marvelous thing we have, because you have a plant, we have a grown plant, and that plant has seeds. And seeds means what? It means that there will be another plant just like it. And maybe not just like it, because there will be in time some genetic variations, so you will have variation too. You will have abundance. you will have sustainability and you will have variation, as it were, too. So seeds then in the Bible belong to the divine gift economy. And gift is a synonym of grace. And I cannot hear my audience here, and you cannot speak back to me. But if you could, I would like to ask you whether you think that seeds fit a paradigm of gift. That seeds, in some ways, in ecologic terms, could be an expression of generosity, an expression of caring, of provision. Just wonder about that it is the divine gift economy, ecologically expressed, that comes to light here. And then seeds are, by this criterion, then saying the same thing again, an expression of generosity. And generosity is the older brother of mercy. Mercy you need when there is need. But before there is need, there could be generosity, and we are looking at that here in this, in the first chapter of the Bible. Now, in our time, if God's seed economy is generously and indiscriminately diffused, we have in our time seed monopolies. People or companies saying, "Hi, we own the patent for that seed. It's our seed and you have to buy it from us. You have to pay for it. And you have to pay quite expensively for it too." So seeds can be modified and patented. And they are today an extremely profitable commodity in the world food system. And in this economy, we have the phenomenon of Roundup ready seeds developed by the company Monsanto, that is now owned by Bayer company in Germany, and where you have modified seeds, cotton seeds, soybeans, and corn to be ready for Roundup. So you can plant your seed, and then you can use Roundup and kill all the weeds. And the weeds will be killed, everything will be killed, except the Roundup ready seed. So you can, in some ways, have a fantastic labor-saving device by spraying glyphosate, that's the compound here, on whatever crop you have and kill off the weeds. It's easy to do. But it takes a lot of killing. You kill off a lot of plants in that process, and for that reason I will call this somewhat less than mercy, a seed economy that has in some ways removed the element of mercy from the equation. And this picture is meant to show the magnitude of this, because you plant millions of acres of these crops with Roundup ready seeds, and then you spray them several times a year, several times a season, with, even aerial spraying. And you kill off then everything else. So you can see that in this sprayed field, as it were, you will have a lot of plants that have been killed and have died. And you might, with time, have the phenomenon of weeds that are resistant to Roundup. So eventually you could have what we call monster weeds, that no longer, it doesn't work any longer, because these are such ecologically disruptive practices, very much risk-taking, you might say. So my conclusion on this part of the presentation is that we have moved from a biblical economy of gift to an economy of commerce. And in that economy of seed commerce, we have ecological practices that are probably quite harmful and that long-term might just not be very, very well advised. Now to land use or soil. So Here is how the land works. The land is distributed. 29% of land of the earth is land, and 71% is ocean. Of the 29%, 71% is habitable. Of the 71%, about half of that can be used for agriculture. And then we get even closer here to break that down, and we see that a whopping almost 80% of that agricultural land is dedicated to meat production, to raising animals and feeding animals to eat the food we grow here as animal protein, as it were. And then in the global calorie supply, we see that not that much is contributed by the meat we eat. Much of it is contributed by plant-based. You can see where I'm headed. I'm headed to say that a plant-based land economy, food economy, is ecologically more attractive and more sustainable than the other side. And then, of course, we have trends in food consumption in the world that seem to go in the wrong direction, because meat is being consumed more and more in all these countries. Now you see that the US is the leader, and from high consumption in 1971 to slightly higher consumption now, it is going up even more. These numbers are not totally up to date. You see India with a minuscule meat consumption compared to the US, that is actually staying quite low here 40 years later in 2011. But in the meantime, of course, the population of India has grown very much, and so the total consumption is up. And for a country like China, here, starting low here, we have China now way up here, 5 times higher in 2011 than in 1971. So we are definitely heading in a direction there. We could call it the wrong direction. So more about soil and what I have learned recently from this wonderful book on dirt, The Erosion of Civilization by David Montgomery. Here is a few quotations from the book. Soil is our most underappreciated, least valued, and yet essential resource. What would we be without soil? We are skinning the planet. Soil is like the skin of the earth, he says, and it is thin skin, and we are losing much of it, and we are losing it to our detriment. It takes 500 years to produce an inch of topsoil, and he has a very interesting chapter about how earthworms contribute to making soil. Mesopotamia, the country now called Iraq, and North Africa, such as Tunisia, they were once the granaries of civilization, very fertile, very big production for Tunis in Roman times and for Mesopotamia in earlier times. And this soil in these countries had been degraded partly by climate change and partly by artificial irrigation. Because when you irrigate artificially in hot climate zones, the earth gets more and more salty. And with time, it becomes infertile, totally degraded. One more thing. The Guatemalan refugees now knocking on the door of the United States, leaving by the thousands and thousands, are economic refugees that are leaving a country that has been damaged, the soil of which has been damaged by agricultural practices that have been unsustainable for the crops grown there, and by owners who lived elsewhere and did not care much about the land. So one of the conclusions of Montgomery's book is this one. Still, farms should be owned by those who work them, by people who know their land and have a stake in improving it. Tenant farming is not in society's best interest. That is to say, huge plots of land owned by people or farmed by people who live elsewhere. It's not in society's best interest. Private ownership is essential. Absentee landlords give little thought to safeguarding the future. And here is a Bible quotation that we have looked at earlier. Let's look at it again. The land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. With me you are but aliens and tenants. So this tendency to centralized ownership of land is not good ecologically, and it is not right biblically, as it were. You can see what I'm trying to say here. Now, in terms of farming the land, just to take this one little step further, I will be relying on this book by Mark Bittman, who writes on food in New York Times, other newspapers, and has written books on the subject, Animal, Vegetable Junk, A History of Food, from Sustainable to Suicidal. And this is an iron plow from 1850s or so, and then it is improved to become a steel plow here with a stronger instrument here for plowing the earth. And then we have the first tractor. This is the John Deere company and their Waterloo Boy, a tractor that makes farming easier. This is from 1918. And here is John Deere today, quite a contraption. And of course, it can do things on an industrial scale. It is labor saving. It is not a given that this is a good idea ecologically. And here another giant harvester. I think this picture is from Australia, but you will have similar scenes in the US and in Canada for sure. So what you have here is, of course, a labor-saving thing. It is easier to farm the land. And maybe this picture can evoke some compassion on our part. This is Jean-François Millet painting a man with a hoe that you can see today in the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. And the land looks inhospitable. It's hard to farm it. He's tired. It's a lot of work. So you might say, well, this is better to have a John Deere contraption, and you can sit in an air-conditioned cabin and listen to classical music while you farm the land. And I'm not going to say that some of these advances have not been real advances. I am going to say that something has been lost. This is Van Gogh's depiction of a couple working the fields, where the distance between the person who works the fields and the field is much shorter. And the sensitivity of this couple to the land and the bonding with the land is obviously of a different order. And this used to be my favorite painting until one or two other paintings climbed one step above it. It's still definitely one of my most prized paintings. Like this couple, taking a moment of rest in a working day, like that couple, the Bible says that the land also needs rest. It's an amazingly prescient ecological conception. And there is mercy in it. Mercy toward the land, and indirectly then mercy to the humans and the animals who live off the land, because the land needs to rest. For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the wild animals may eat. So the land is in need of rest to recuperate. And yes, damage to land by intensive artificial watering and making it more and more salty would be somewhat remedied by this concept of land rest. It's quite amazing. It is ecologically relevant. I have quoted Wendell Berry before. We do not tire of what he says about preserving the earth and ecological relationships. So in his book, The Unsettling of America, he talks about the crisis in agriculture, and he says that he uses very strong language. He says that the cost of this totalitarianism in energy, land, and social disruption will be enormous. It will lead to the exhaustion of farmland and farm culture. Husbandry will become an extractive industry. The person sitting there on the combine is in some ways an industrial character now. Husbandry will become an extractive industry because maintenance will entirely give way to production. The fertility of the soil will become a limited, unrenewable resource like coal or oil. These are stark visions. Okay, to our third one, about animals. And I have shown you a picture before, I think in an earlier presentation, of Jonathan Safran Foer and his book, Eating Animals. He has another one called We Are the Weather. And he also, like Derrida, uses the concept of war. We have waged war, or rather let a war be waged against all the animals we eat. This war is new and has a name, factory farming. So let's see what this means. And I just feature this in a kind of flyover way. There are many videos you can access, and I tried out a few of them. I've chosen just to give you still pictures here. 1 million chicken in one farm. That's a lot of chicken crowded, and there is accelerated growth, and there is no meaning to that animal's life. Absolutely no meaning, except what happens at the end when you are eaten. And here you have pigs, and there used to be 700,000 pig or pork raising farms in the US in 1979. Now the number is 65,000. Pigs crowded into, or pigs in ever more crowded facilities, accelerated growth, just in incredible suffering, incredibly healthy, a total violation of the animal's instincts. And then you have these feedlots for cattle, where you can have up to 100,000 animals standing in that feedlot for quite a long time, just to get ready to be slaughtered. These are exhibits, as it were, on what some people call a war on mercy. And I agree with them. And I think a biblical perspective on these practices justify calling it that. Jonathan Safran Foer, he adds this to his presentation. We have focused the awesome power of modern genetic knowledge to bring into being animals that suffer more. You breed animal species, you can do some genetic modification too, and the animal will grow faster, but it will suffer more. It will not be good for the animal's health. And I have an example from a newspaper clipping here from about 20 years ago, when the genetic ability, or here is what it says, someday hogs may not have to eat like pigs. Scientists say they have found a way to genetically alter young hogs so that they grow 40% faster and larger than normal swine on 25% less feed. That has not been implemented yet, but don't be surprised if it happens. One of my favorite personalities or communicators or scientists in this field is Timothy Pashirat, who is now a professor in a university in Massachusetts. But he wrote this book every 12 seconds some years ago, 2009. The subtitle is Industrialized Slaughter and the Politics of Sight. He took a job working undercover at a slaughterhouse in Omaha, Nebraska, and he observed how this happened, how this slaughterhouse operated. And every 12 seconds, that's how often a large animal, a cattle, an ox, a cow, comes to be killed on a conveyor belt. Chew, 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 every 12 seconds. And then what happened to the animal afterwards. And in one passage of this book, he says that as of 2009, 9 billion animals were killed for food every year in the United States alone. 9 billion animals, that is a lot of animals. Of these, there were some 8 billion 500 million chickens, 246 million turkeys, 114 million pigs, it's 130 million now, 33 million cattle, 23 million ducks, 3 million sheep and lambs, and 1 million calves. It takes a huge industry to even just do the killing of these animals, and he is interested in that. He thinks that we have deliberately sequestered these sites, these facilities. We have made them inaccessible in order for us to protect industries by unawareness, by ignorance of it. So he says something here that I would quote. At the same time, his book is also an account of how concealment and visibility are at work within the slaughterhouse, where distance and concealment continue to operate as mechanisms of domination. A politics of sight that breaches zones of confinement may indeed be a critically important catalyst for political transformation. He theorizes that if you opened up these facilities, our practices would change. That's one of the points. But then he also says this.
I think there's really three major questions that I focus on. The first question is about the relationship between knowledge, transparency, and social change. Often we make assumptions that social change is not occurring because people lack knowledge, and a lot of my research challenges that assumption by looking at situations where people have very clear knowledge of what's going on in terms of domination or exploitation or oppression, and yet continue to engage in those relationships anyway. And so I think we need to do a lot more research into what happens when people actually know what's happening and yet don't change their attitudes, opinions, or behavior.
He says that visibility would help, but maybe it isn't helping as much as we would like it to. So beyond visibility, we might also need incentives toward mercy that simple knowledge will not give you. And reading Romans and Romans' message about mercy could, in this respect, be a corrective, a remedial thing to become more aware of God's mercy and more adept at practicing it. Just as I was preparing this presentation, the New York Times on December 16, 2021, had this article by Ezra Klein. We will look back on this age of cruelty to animals in horror, and his hamburger or his burger here is an axe and a saw and implements of torture that he will say are represent the way we treat non-human creatures. How we treat farm animals today will be seen, I believe, as a defining moral failing of our age. What's changed over the past century is that we've developed the technology to produce meat in industrialized conditions, and that has opened a vast open vast new vistas for both production and suffering. And he says here, I will abbreviate this statement by his own commitment. He says that of the money he gives to humanitarian causes, 10%, he says, every year of my donations goes to easing or ending the suffering of factory farmed animals. And he calls this something that happens on a mind melting scale. I thought that was an attractive thing. You know, I take my hat off to a person who feels the pain of non-human creatures and is actually wishing to remedy it. So, okay, my final example, final point as a little addendum here perhaps, will be on the ecology of coronavirus transmission. Because we are now in a pandemic that promises to change the world. We may never get it back, the world we knew. And this virus has an ecological character, or it belongs in an ecological context. It lives in a reservoir host. And in this host, the virus lives happily ever after. And the host doesn't kill the virus. So you have a host and virus living in a kind of mutually beneficial relationship. But then the virus might move into an intermediate host, an amplifying host, and that intermediate host has not been completely settled for COVID-19 as yet, but there had been some candidates proposed. And the human infection doesn't go from the reservoir host directly to humans, it goes through that intermediate. So that is a ecological connection. And the intermediate host can infect other species than humans and vice versa. So you can see a kind of broad dissemination of infections here. And here is our virus illustrated. So just to see the ecology of this, bats are, for many of the coronaviruses, the reservoir host. Some of the intermediary hosts have been identified for MERS and SARS-1, that was the palm civet. For the COVID-19, we don't know for sure yet which is the intermediate host, but it is all but certain that there is one. So this is the one we are looking at here. And then all this converges then in the end to become human infections. And the world has been different now since the first of these big zoonotic viruses came. AIDS, the AIDS virus that I met early in my medical training, was a zoonotic disease transmitted to humans through gorillas, or in Africa. That it was the intermediate was in Africa. So here in this zoonotic viral ecology, zoonoses are diseases we share with animals. Here is a primary host. Here is one candidate intermediary host. That's the pangolin. We don't know that for sure, but the pangolin is the most trafficked wild animal in the world today. A huge trade, and it is also, though it is a very shy animal, bred in captivity, and then onto human infections. So recently, just in November 2021, Michael Worobey, who is a scientist at the University of Arizona, he tracked the early COVID-19 cases in Wuhan, in China, and he concluded that most of the early cases were from the wet markets in Wuhan. So that has strengthened that theory and strengthened the idea that there was an animal intermediate host. And here, those wet markets, unfortunately, fortunately they were closed, Unfortunately, the animals in those markets were not tested in time before the animals were closed. David Quammen has written very intelligently about this new reality in our world, spillover, animal infections, and the next human pandemic. This book was published initially in 2012, and he says in this book that human-caused ecological pressures and disruptions are bringing animal pathogens ever more into contact with human populations, while human technology and behavior are spreading those pathogens ever more widely and quickly. So ecology plays out here, and it must be understood ecologically. This is a crisis with a cause. Make no mistake, he says here. They are connected, these disease outbreaks coming one after another, and they are not simply happening to us. They represent the unintended results of things we are doing. They reflect the convergence of two forms of crisis on our planet. The first crisis is ecological. The second is medical. And it is also a crisis of mercy. A mercy deficit in the way we relate to the earth and to non-human creatures. So let's sum it up here, and we are reading Romans as an eco-text too. And the righteous shall live by my faithfulness and my mercifulness too. We are earthlings on a fragile earth. We ourselves belong to the community of creation. The plight of other creatures matters to a merciful God. Soil, seeds, and animals, originally elements and beings within the web of divine mercy, are now subjected to exploitation and unprecedented cruelty. And the take-home message, the one who lives by the mercy of God is called to live out the mercy of God. This is part of the retrieval of compassion in Romans.